Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar of 2020. New year, new perspective, questions every educator should ask themselves when planning and reflecting. So tonight's webinar is just a short mini webinar. It's only 30 minutes. So we're going to get started in just a minute. But while we're waiting for everybody to get signed on, I just want to remind everybody about the features of this webinar platform. So first, to look for that little blue group chat widget that is on your screen. We're going to be using that later in the session so that we can have a group discussion with each other. But for right now, we'd love if you could introduce yourself, tell us your name and where you're from, and what grade levels you teach or support. And then we also have the green resource widget, which is where you'll find all of the resources that we are discussing tonight. And apologies if you tried that resource widget, some of the links in that resource widget about 10 minutes ago, the links weren't working, but thank you so much for the core advocate who alerted us to that. So all the links should be working now and you should have access to all of those resources. So let's get going. So tonight you will be hearing from three of us. You'll be hearing from Kate Athens. She's an education consultant, former teacher and coach, and also a core advocate, and she helped co-author these documents. You'll also be hearing from Susan Hitt, Digital Content Associate here at Student Achievement Partners, and myself, Claire Rivero. I'm the Digital Strategy Manager here. So we always like to begin our webinars by hearing who is on the call with us tonight. So if you can just quickly fill out about how many core advocate webinars you think you've attended. Just your best guess. Great. So it looks like we have, and this is very common for us, we see this most times, that most of you are newcomers. So you're either have seen just a couple of webinars or this is your very first one. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you aren't a core advocate, this is a core advocate webinar and everyone is welcome to join these webinars whether you're a core advocate or not. But if you're interested in learning more about learning opportunities, professional learning opportunities like this, connecting with other educators around standards-aligned instruction, then we hope you'll consider joining our free Core Advocate Network. So the link to join the Core Advocate Network is in your resource widget. It's also here on the screen, and you'll be sent access to these slides later on. And if you have any questions about what it means to be a Core Advocate, what the program is all about, you can reach out to Jenny or Joy, and their email addresses are here. But the network is primarily focused on professional learning. And we also have now a new quarterly digital magazine, which we're really excited about, that goes out to all of the core advocates. If you're active on Twitter, we hope you'll share what you're learning tonight by tweeting to your networks. And you can use hashtag core advocates if you're doing any live tweeting. And also if you have any questions or you want to tweet directly at us, we are at Achieve the Core on Twitter. And if you don't want to leave the webinar platform, you don't want to distract yourself, there is a button and you can tweet directly from this webinar platform. Then quick reminder about ways you can engage with us tonight. So if you have a question just for the presenters, or if you have a question, you're having some technical difficulty, you can't see the slides, you can't hear anything, you can shoot us a question in the Q&A. And if we have time, it's a short webinar tonight, but if we have time, we may be able to answer some questions at the end of the session as well. And then as I mentioned, the resource widget is where you'll find links to all of the resources we're discussing tonight. And then keep an eye on that group chat because we're going to have a little group discussion, share some ideas together. And then after the webinar, you'll receive an email with access to the recording. And then in 2 weeks, we will send you an email with a survey. We're curious about whether you have been able to use any of the resources that we'll be discussing tonight or whether you've been able to share them. And after you complete that survey, you'll receive a certificate verifying 1 hour of professional learning. So since it's a short webinar tonight, we just have 2 goals. And that's the first one is to learn about the origin of the Quick Reference question guides, learn about their development and their relationship to the instructional practice guide and lesson planning tool. And then we'll discuss some potential use cases and hopefully give you some ideas for ways you can put this into use tomorrow, next week, right away. So I'm going to turn it over now to Susan Hitt, who's going to talk about the origin of the quick reference documents.
Hi, yes, thank you. So just checking, Claire, are you looking at the lesson planning tool slide? It's been messing up on my end again. Okay,
yep,
perfect.
Nope. Do you want me to move this? You want to just tell me when to move the slides? Because it looks like you're doing it fine, but if it's easier, I can move them. Okay, I'll move them when you tell me.
So the two resource documents we'll be discussing tonight are a product of the interactive digital lesson planning tool that we have on our website, Achieve the Core. Though it's a fantastic free resource that walks educators through the entire lesson planning process and allows for easy sharing with coaches for feedback, we realize that not everyone has time to walk their way through the lesson planning tool for every single lesson. In addition, we realize that educators may want to talk about some of the components of the lesson planning outside of the actual process of planning a lesson. This might be in your PLCs or in a coaching conversation. I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay, changed it.
Perfect, thank you. So then we took all the questions from the lesson planning tool and created downloadable documents. But at approximately 16 pages each, they weren't really something that one could easily print and use as a quick reference tool every time they planned, either as an individual, within a PLC, or a coach. Next. So with our mindset on creating a quick reference tool, and what you're looking at here was the original lesson planning tool. So you can see, or the resource guides, you can see there's a lot of text. It's very text heavy. So on the next slide, you'll see we began our work with the math version. After we laid out the new, more user-friendly version, we surveyed math educators of all grade levels from all backgrounds. It was important for us to get feedback directly from the educators who would be using these documents. In addition to asking questions about each section of the document, we also asked how they might see themselves using this tool and had a few open-ended questions at the end asking for any other feedback they might like to share. We took their feedback, which was filled with great ideas and lots of suggestions, and we made a few final tweaks before the math version was ready to go. And then with that, we moved on to the ELA version. So in the group chat, if you will share one way that you identify and select questions to discuss in professional learning settings, we'd love to see what some of your thoughts and ideas are.
Yeah, seeing some great answers coming in here. I really love to have these webinars function more like discussions so that we can all be learning from each other. So I'm seeing a lot of things based on local settings. So listening to what teachers have expressed needs with, what their comfort level is, what they need to grow with, thinking about surveying staff, thinking about school goals. So these are all great ways to really customize the coaching and reflection that you do to your local setting. So keep these coming. I'm going to just keep us moving so that we can make sure we're done in 30 minutes, but please continue to share your ideas so we can all benefit from them. So now we just want to take you on a quick tour through the math and ELA quick reference documents. You can explore them more on your own, but just to give you a high-level idea of what you'll find here, I'm going to start by talking about the math quick reference document. So as Susan mentioned, this is built on the foundation of the lesson planning tool. So if you have used that tool in the past or you've used the instructional practice guide, you'll recognize that it's organized similarly to encompass all the components of standards aligned instruction. So we start by thinking about grade level standards aligned content, and then we think about making coherent connections to previous student learning, and then we dig into instructional practice, classroom activities, classroom discussions, and how to assess whether the instruction was successful and whether students are learning. So quick disclaimer that these do not need to be done in order. If you're a coach or if you're using these for self-reflection, you can feel free to zoom in on one particular section. You don't need to sort of walk through them in a sequential order. But we did start at the top by thinking about the goals for the lesson and how to plan for student success, anticipating student questions in areas where they might struggle with that grade level content. Then in the coherent connections section, we talk about building upon students' prior knowledge and skills to help them be successful with that grade level content. And then the problems and exercises section helps you think about what is the most efficient way to use your time and students' time. How can you think about what are the highest leverage tasks that you might do with the time you have allocated in your day for math instruction? And then how can you make sure that all of your students are prepared to be successful? What scaffolds, what supports can you put in place to help them be successful? And then we have questions on formative assessment strategies, making sure that the instruction that you delivered was in fact effective. Are students learning what you had envisioned the learning goals of the lesson to be? And then the last section, we really built out a lot more just because we've heard a lot from teachers and a lot from the network, really, that the Core Advocate Network, that classroom discussions in mathematics are a real area of interest and area for growth. For math teachers, we really feel that and teachers in general feel that classroom discussions in math have been something that's been overlooked, and we really want to use these as opportunities to build students' understanding and build their confidence in speaking about math. So there are a lot of questions in this section to help with that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about ELA.
Great, thank you, Claire. So for the ELA Quick Reference document, there was a very similar approach to math. We started by looking at the instructional practice side and specifically the lesson planning tool, and we condensed and combined some of the sections to create a flow that lends itself better to being used in many different capacities: discussion, lesson preparation, planning, while still hopefully retaining the core parts of the IPG that make it so helpful to teachers, coaches, administrators, everyone. So I'm just going to walk you through the categories of the Quick Reference document. Some of them might sound familiar to the IPG, some of them are a little bit different. So the first page really focuses on evaluating for text complexity. So that includes this section, which is evaluating for text complexity, and then also reader and task considerations. These questions also provide links to Achieve the Core's resources around qualitative and quantitative text analysis, which is incredibly helpful as a teacher. I would love to have those on hand, so I really like that they're linked here. And they also have also include some questions to walk you through how to evaluate your text and whether you might want to consider different texts in different situations. Next, reader and task considerations, so making sure that you're considering who's going to be reading the text and what engagement opportunities they will have. Then moving on the next page, same on this slide, it's beginning of the second page of the document, the big idea and culminating task. This section really focuses on envisioning what the big idea of that rigorous text you chose is, and making sure that you understand it, and then designing a task that will allow students to unpack that idea themselves. This is much condensed from the original tool, but provides lots of discussion opportunities. And then the last couple sections really are focused on what students are going to be doing and reflecting on what they've done. So planning for text-dependent questioning activities and tasks. There are many parts of the tool that are in here. This allows teachers, coaches, everyone to think through the tasks and potential discussion questions that would really guide readers through the most complex parts of the text that you've hopefully evaluated using those previous tools. And then finally, student supports, how you're going to provide support and scaffolding and potentially extension for students who may be reading above that grade level to make sure that all students have access to the rigorous text, but that you're not robbing them of opportunities to come to those big ideas for themselves. So I'm going to pass it back over to Claire, who's going to talk about how we're going to use these documents, or how you could use these documents.
Thanks, Kate. So we are going to describe a couple of ways that we envisioned that you could use these questions depending on your role. And you continue to use the group chat. I see some great conversations happening over there. So continue to use the group chat. If you have ideas yourselves about ways you could use that, please do share those with the group. But we'll share some of the ideas that we had. So first, we're going to talk about how you might use these as a coach. So if you are a coach and if you're familiar with the lesson planning tool, these questions can be used in a similar way to the way you might have used the components of lesson planning tool to talk through the process of planning a model lesson. Obviously, you don't want to ask all of these questions just in the same way that you wouldn't go through the entire lesson planning tool for every lesson. This is really about building confidence with planning standards-aligned instruction and digging into different components of standards-aligned instruction. So you might use it for that holistic view of planning a lesson. You could also focus on one question or a section that addresses an area that you have already identified as a growth area for one of your teachers. And these questions might really help you, again, to really dig in and get to some of the reasons they might be struggling or seeing their students struggle in that area. And then the third one is one I'm really excited about, because this is an idea that was originated by one of our core advocates, Kenny McKee. And he's a coach in his school, and he uses a digital coaching menu to help teachers really get the most out of their coaching time that they have with him. So this is essentially a sign-up sheet, but it's a sign-up sheet for what the teacher feels they want to talk about. So they can suggest, he has a list of options, and there are, you as a teacher would select, I really want to work on this, and you can also select how you want to receive that coaching. So whether you want your coach to model that lesson, whether you want to dig in and have a discussion about it. So this is linked here on the slide. It's also in your resource widget. But we were thinking that these questions in the quick reference guide would actually make really good topics for discussion, and they might be really great ways to build out your digital coaching menu if you want to make one. So again, in the resource widget, there's the opportunity to download this and customize it yourself. You also might want to hold a working session with somebody that you're coaching based on one of the questions. So for instance, in the math version, if you want to really dig into planning a standards-aligned discussion in math that's really engaging, you could go through some of those questions to think about what's working and what's not with your current discussions. And then the last idea is about using it to talk about a cycle of coaching and thinking about iterating on a particular lesson or unit. So you can start by talking about the topic, making a plan for how that instruction will go. Then the teacher would teach it, you would observe as the coach, and then you can meet back again to reflect on how it went. Maybe ask those questions again with the lens of, did we really hit it? What were some ways we could have improved on it? And then teach it again, and that cycle sort of can continue in an ongoing way. So earlier this fall, some teachers in our virtual learning course had the opportunity to preview the math version of this. And so I included this quote because I think it's really interesting from a coach who took that course about her reflections on how she's planning to use the quick reference documents. So she said, due to the curriculum we use, the teachers I work with currently teach major clusters the majority of the time. The difference comes in how the lesson looks in the classroom. I was excited by the questions. I think this will help me coach teachers in the actions they take when teaching major and supporting clusters. Are they teaching with the correct intention in mind? So she was working in a setting where teachers had a really good curriculum. They were teaching standards-aligned content, but she realized there were areas for growth that could become even stronger, and these questions really led those teachers in that direction.
If you have a weekly or monthly PLC, then we suggest that you add these quick reference documents to your next agenda. It's a great opportunity to use the time that you've already set aside and have booked on a calendar as a way to either plan or reflect as a group. Just having time to work your way through the questions will create a great opportunity for some group discussion and reflection. So we encourage you to take these back to your PLC and share them and discuss them.
Great. And as an individual teacher, you might use these for both lesson preparation and reflection as well as discussion. That might look like using the document to go through an already established lesson to check for rigor. It also provides you with some quick access to the ICG questions. So if you're trying to look at one particular area of a math or ELA lesson that you know you want to think about, it can be a quicker way to access that. You also might want to use these tools for intellectual preparation for a lesson, so envisioning an upcoming lesson in depth, and maybe double checking that your planned lesson activities and tasks are aligned with the standards or the rigor of the text for ELA. And for lesson reflection, after a lesson, if something didn't go to plan or didn't feel rigorous enough, you might use some of these questions to get a conversation started about how you might re-envision or reteach that lesson. And finally, as an individual, but also similar to CLC, this is a really great jumping off point for conversations with peers around maybe a peer observation or something that you're noticing in a peer's lesson. So I think that would be a really wonderful way to use these tools as well as an individual.
Great. So we went through these slides faster than I anticipated, which is great because we have some time for questions. I'm going to put up our links to how you can get in contact with us because I realize that some people may want to take some time to personally look at these questions, and they may have questions on the questions later on after they've had a chance to review them and try them out in their classrooms. So if you have questions on them later, feel free to reach out to us on any of these platforms, Twitter, Facebook. And then you can also, there's also a feedback button on the page where these questions live, and you can send us feedback directly there or questions directly there. But for tonight, if anyone has any questions that came up as we were introducing them, we'd be happy to answer them now. Let me see if there are any questions in our Q&A box. Doesn't look like there are any questions. Go ahead and type them in if you have any questions right now. I'm going to move to the next slide, which is just our reminder to join us next month. We have these every month, the first week of the month, and next month's webinar will be a full-hour webinar, back to our regular schedule, and we're going to be talking about integrating curriculum and assessment, and we'll be using an example of grade 3 fractions, and that will be February 5th at 7 p.m. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any other questions in the Q&A box, but if you have one or I'm cutting you off too early and you didn't get a chance to type them in, please do feel free to email them to us, push that feedback button, or talk to us on Twitter or Facebook. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar of 2020. New year, new perspective. Questions every educator should ask themselves when planning and reflecting. So tonight's webinar is just a short mini webinar. It's only 30 minutes. So we're going to get started in just a minute. But while we're waiting for everybody to get signed on, I just want to remind everybody about the features of this webinar.